Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good morning, depending on where you are. For today's episode, we actually have one of the greatest economists, I think, of my time attending this and interviewing, discussing with us a series of topics, but mostly the role of the US dollar at the core of the international monetary systems. So the gentleman that will be joining us is Otaviano Canuto. He's a Brazilian economist, executive director at the World Bank. He has served as an executive director at the IMF for Brazil, Cabo Verde, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Guyana, Haiti, Nicaragua, Panama, Suriname, Timor-Leste, Trinidad and Tobago. And he has also served as the head of the Poverty Reduction and Economic Management and as a senior advisor to the BRICS economies at the World Bank. Simultaneously, he was also the State Secretary for International Affairs at the Ministry of Finance of Brazil between the years 2002 and 2003. Otaviano is someone that I have collaborated with in the past during my tenure in Expert Networks. He's the author of numerous books, including Until Debt Do Us Part, Subnational Debt, Insolvency and Markets, and currently is a professor at the Elliott School of International Affairs. He also holds numerous fellow positions, including the Paulus Center for the New South, Brookings Institution, ILAS Colombian Center of Microeconomics and Development. Overall, as I aforementioned, one of the greatest economists to have existed in our current generation, and I look forward to speaking with him. He should be joining shortly. Can you hear me well?
Oh, good.
Excuse me. All right, cool. So, Otaviano, just to give you a brief idea as to what I want to do is I'm trying to set up a channel where people can sort of visit and hear people that have a vast experience in a series of things,
Right.
uh, and just to get the sort of, I don't know, just expand their mind a little bit on a series of topics, right? Uh,
Okay.
um, I know you from my expert network experience, and we've built a relationship one way or another. So I really appreciate you as an individual, as an economist. For me, you're one of the greatest economists. I followed your work quite a lot across from what 2020 up until now, where that we first met. So I appreciate you taking the time to speak to me because I'm essentially, literally nobody, just somebody that's sort of
Oh, come on. You're simply a young person. Just don't say
yeah,
anything.
just there with the excitement.
Yeah. Just 5 seconds to close the door of my place
No
here. Just a
no
minute.
problem.
Oh, no, it's closed. Okay.
Okay, cool. So I appreciate you taking the time to speak to me, and I wanted us to discuss a topic that might be a little bit close to your heart, which is why I sort of asked you what topic you would be a little bit more comfortable with. And as far as I understand it, the role of the U.S. dollar, which is a very serious topic, uh, at the core of the international monetary system, is something you wanted us to tackle today, right?
Yeah, simply, I've been working on this in the last few days. Next Tuesday, I'm going to present a report at think tank, the IAI, the Institut d'Affaires Internationales in Rome. I will not be there in person, but it's online. But then the topic is about exactly the are we moving towards some sort of a multiple monetary international monetary system, not what are the factors of still remaining of strength of the dollar and whether other alternative currencies can make a difference. And so I thought maybe we could talk about it simply because I'm just preparing my presentation next Tuesday, and so that's why.
I mean, what you're presenting sounds fantastic, and I kind of want the answer to that question. Do you, in a very short answer, is it a yes or a no? And then we'll just jump back and take it from the beginning.
Okay.
Cool. So, from the get-go, How did the U.S. dollar become the dominant global reserve currency?
Well, the fact is that there are some, let's say, network advantages that accompany the rising use of a currency. Some factors that tend to provide economies for whoever deals. See, money has basically three functions. One of them, obviously, it is to serve as a unit of account. But money can be a means of payment,
Hmm?
and as which is a flow. Okay, so you have the flow of trade of goods and service that have to be paid. You have the flow of purchase of financial assets and so on, which have to be paid. So that's the function as a means of payment. And you also have more resembling stocks, money as a reserve of value, as a way to keep maintain wealth.
Okay.
Obviously, both are related in the sense that, of course, for instance, take central banks. Central banks have to intervene in markets when they need to make payments and to allow the normal functioning of the exchange transactions and so on. And obviously, central banks have to maintain reserves on a currency that can be easily accepted in the market. By the same token, private agents and other wealth holders, they have their stocks of wealth when it comes to assets and so on in a certain currency. It's important to distinguish because sometimes the rise of a currency as a means of payment does not necessarily lead it to be a store of value. And I illustrate this in the following. Uh, China
Hmm.
has been proactive in extending the use of its currency, the renminbi, yuan in Chinese. And the renminbi has been pulled by the Chinese in the ways they can and so on, establishing agreements with countries, trying to replace the use of dollar or other currencies in settling payments between China and other countries, particularly as the share of global trade of China has ramped up over the last decades. But given the fact that China still maintains strong restrictions to capital outflows, the other central banks and as well as private agents feel less comfortable in keeping their wealth in Chinese assets
Hmm.
because they fear that when push comes to shove and they want to liquidate their assets and do something else, that they would face restrictions. So this has limited the diffusion of uh, of the renminbi as an international currency uh, in assets and so on. The Chinese are conscious of that. Uh, it's an option, and I explain. When back in 2015 and 16, I was one of the executive directors at the IMF, and there was the candidacy of the renminbi to join other the other four major currencies that comprise the basket of reference for the accounting money issued by the IMF, the special drawing rights. We had there at the base of the SDRs, the special drawing rights, until then, the US dollar, the sterling pound, the euro, and the Japanese yen.
Hmm.
And China had tried 5 years before in 2010, and it was not approved to be part of that basket. But in 2015, things were different, and China uh, uh, attempted to include the renminbi into that basket, and it was approved. It was not. It did not fulfill all three criteria for that entirely. When it came to participation of the renminbi in trade transactions, obviously, given the size of the Chinese trade, it complied quite well. There was also another criterion, which was to have public debt issued and negotiated in at least two of the three major financial markets of the world, and they were Hong Kong, London, and New York.
Hmm.
China only had in Hong Kong, but then China issued a bond in London, so it complied the second criterion. Whereas the third one, which is the share in financial transactions, China didn't have it. Now, among the preconditions to have the renminbi as part of the SDR, the IMF demanded China to eliminate some restrictions between financial markets in the continent of China and Hong Kong. And China did it. But it happens the following. In a short time, literally more than $300 billion left China by Chinese, okay?
Okay.
The Chinese diversifying their wealth. Naturally, they seize the opportunity to diversify their wealth, buying assets abroad.
Along
And
with the golden visa as well, for example.
yes, and then the Chinese authorities,
Yep.
caught it back.
Yeah.
And so the Chinese know that for the renminbi really to become an asset in China, to become part of the whole uh, tissue of global assets and so on, for any aspiration of challenging the hegemony of the dollar or other currencies, that they will have to open. And that may come sometime in the future. But for the time being, they prefer to go where they can, which is particularly through the official transactions among central banks and so on. Now, uh, why the dollar remains the hegemon, and is this hegemony is expressed in the fact that the share of trade invoiced in dollars, the share of financial flows denominated in dollar, and so on, are much, much, much larger than the size of the US economy and the size of the US trade. And once you have an installed situation such as this, there are economies of scale that allow the operations in that currency to stay. It was like this before the World War One with the sterling
Mhm.
pound. Then we had in between the two world wars a period of instability and volatility between the sterling pound and dollar. And after World War II, and the Bretton Woods
Bretton
system
Woods.
establishing convertibility of the US dollar to gold, and as well as a system of fixed and occasionally adjustable exchange rates among the currencies, led inevitably to dollar and correspondingly gold to be at the center. And once it was there, then there are economies of scale and scope
Mhm.
that tend to hold it where it is. Is this uh, eternal? No. Uh, but the other currencies that aspire to replace, at least partially, the US dollar have to deal with that, have to win that advantage. And or when the feeling of security in using the dominant currency, when the fear and insecurity rise. This has happened more recently.
Do you think we're in an era where it has risen to as much as
That's right.
it?
And
Yeah.
not by chance. We watched with the reciprocal tariffs by Mr. Trump on Deliberation Day, the announcement of that create. Well, okay, there was a shock already. This
Mhm.
undeniable. Uh, right after the invasion of the Ukraine by Russia
Mhm.
and the sanctions that were established by the US and Europeans and Japan on Russia, that obviously led to the departure from the dollar-based payment system, not only by the countries that were under sanctions, but also other countries got, including China, uh, a
I
bit.
was reading an article. I'm sorry to interrupt you there. Where there was a point where I think Russia was trading some goods with Pakistan in a bartering system. So you get X amount of potatoes, I'll give you X amount of rice.
That's right. That's right. And or using the renminbi,
Okay.
or and also other countries accepted that. It was the way for Russia to attempted to evade the sanctions and so on. And it's true that the sanctions were not enough to shatter entirely the confidence on having transactions in dollar and so on. The SWIFT, which is the system of payments based on dollar, that is, in fact, uh, logistically headquartered in Brussels, but which depends in New York on New York anyway. But it was, it had an effect, and that's when alternative forms of payment are developed, the Chinese doing this and so on. And this year, it's incredible how the policies by Mr. Trump, uh, the sort of a clear announcement that the U.S. is not necessarily and no longer willing to provide for free, in their view, a service, multilateral service for the rest of the world. This led many agents, private agents, as well as holders, to dismantle or at least diversify their global portfolios out of the dollar assets and towards something else. Uh, the beneficiaries of this reshuffle of global portfolios have been uh, public debt uh, from Japan, from Germany, from Italy, even Italy, okay, but not necessarily the strongest ones, and gold.
Hmm.
It's impressive how central banks have increased dramatically their reserves in gold.
What about crypto?
And yeah, nobody believes in crypto as a safe reserve asset.
Hmm.
There may be the case in the future, it's increasing in the case of the U.S. The not Bitcoin, but the crypto assets that are stable coins
Mm-hmm.
that have a connection in a base with the real
Dollar.
money. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there we have a certain divergence of tendencies. On the one hand, while the U.S. Has a, a scope, a preference for those crypto assets, particularly stable coins and so on. The president issued his his crypto asset. His wife is
Yeah, yeah,
incredible.
yeah.
It's complicated.
It is a
Europe
little bit.
Europe has more a tendency to adopt some sort of a central bank digital currency.
Okay.
Uh, the one of the issues I had is going to be exactly the consequence for the international monetary system as a whole of this co-living of higher reliance on crypto assets on the U.S. side versus probably higher reliance on central bank digital currencies in the case of the Eurozone, any other parts of the world. And
Do you
China,
think a digital currency, I'm sorry, I'm sidetracking a little bit, but do
no,
you think
no,
a digital currency, a centralized digital currency in Europe could happen? And I mean, I live in the south of Europe. So the south of Europe, to me, that's already a myriad of conspiracy theories popping up. Uh, so I don't know to what extent it could be implemented across all of the European Union. I can see the case for it in countries like Germany and Scandinavia potentially, but I find it very, very hard to implement in southern countries.
no. Well, why? You already have an integrated monetary region area. It's the Eurozone. One important aspect of the agenda that has not been completed of the euro is the unification of the banking system. You still
Mhm.
have a banking system in the eurozone and financial system that is fragmented and that is separated, and not by chance. Uh, Anyone that talks about the euro becoming really an alternative to the US dollar remarks the need to have the completion of this monetary unification of the Eurozone. And let me just say a bit about this. And by the way, this was said explicitly by Madame Lagarde,
Hmm.
the president of the European Central Bank, in a speech in Berlin, what, 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. She laid out an agenda about what has to be done in order for the euro to really become an alternative to the US dollar. The euro jumped after its inauguration, right? 25 years ago. Yes, 25.
Hmm.
But then the gums got stuck at a certain level. It remains still mostly a regional currency. Now, uh, among other reasons, because the task of completing the eurozone, the euro unification, was not completed. You had the creation of a single money, a single central bank, etc., but you don't have the fiscal unification. Uh, See, that's why we had the eurozone crisis
Hmm.
beginning of the previous of the last decade, right after the global financial crisis. Since you never had the unification of the banking system, there was a bubble. You live in South Europe. You really like we had the bubble here in the U.S. where I live. with real estate in the years before, and that led to the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009. You also had a similar thing happening in Europe
Mm-hmm.
with respect to real estate in Greece and Portugal, Spain, and so on. And that was backed, like here in the US, by financial banking flows towards the local banks and in those zones, financing the real estate acquisition and the bubble. When the bubble splattered, like here
Mm-hmm.
in the case of the eurozone, uh, the king was revealed as naked. That's the expression, or the it's Warren Buffett who always used to say that. Are you there?
Yeah, yeah, I'm here. I'm here. I'm here. I'm just
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
mesmerized.
Sorry, it's something here.
No problem.
Uh, then Warren Buffett had an interesting expression, which was the following about bubbles and financial waves. Uh, Only when the tide comes down is that whoever is naked is taken bath naked is revealed. When the tide is going up, uh,
It's very hard to see who's naked.
that's right. But once the tide comes down, it appears.
It just feels
Uh,
to me, I'm sorry, Otaviano. It just feels to me that the South is currently living inside another bubble.
oh,
Um, that's how I see it, at least.
well, on the other hand, the the fiscal adjustment that has been implemented in those countries have improved very well their stance, their strength. Uh, Spain is performing extremely well, particularly in the financial markets and so on. Uh, where are you seeing a
I'm in
king?
Greece. I'm in Greece, so I'm in the worst of the worst.
Yeah. But in any case, the agenda will demand a higher fiscal connection. Is not by chance that the Eurozone crisis really had two moments of resolution. The first one when Mario Draghi, as president of the European Central Bank, declared that the ECB would do whatever it takes to counter speculative flows against the Eurozone.
Hmm.
And then Mario Draghi started the quantitative easing and intervening in the markets. And the second one was later, the second moment of ending the Eurozone crisis, when during the pandemic, there was the announcement of a joint Eurozone public title.
Hmm.
And then, there is there's no that lowered the risk that the Greece, Spain, and Portugal and Italy would be left on their own if some kind of crisis happened and so on.
Yeah.
So, in that was a vivid demonstration of the need to have a higher degree of fiscal integration of perception by investors that the countries are all together in making sure that the bonds are safer, and that's why Oh, and by the way, and Madame Lagarde also added an item as necessary to strengthen the confidence on the euro, which was she called geopolitical, namely arming. The investors must feel secure that that their assets are not vulnerable and so on. So it's important to have which is part of this current movement. After all, Trump said that he would not put the
Um,
same amount of money into NATO. You guys will
mhm.
have to take care of yourselves. And Germany quitted its very conservatist fiscal stance, and all the countries are now spending a lot
Depends.
on defense and so on. And but anyway, then the ECB president, Madame Lagarde, said, "Well, this will help in strengthening the position of the euro." But the point is that as Madame Lagarde and the Europeans as a whole smells a moment, an opportunity to raise the stakes of the eurozone as a safe haven for investors.
Hmm.
Uh, and the agenda goes there. There must be as well, as I said, unification of the banking system and so on. But the point is that these are the factors that underlie and by the way, you is my aren't the Americans uh, concerned with that? Well, don't they like the position of the dollar as a safe haven asset and as the provider of the reserve currency most used in the world? Yes and no, in the following sense. The country that provides the safe haven asset must accept that the rest of the world uh, every year has a demand for liquid U.S. assets, and for that they have to sell more than purchase. They have to have a surplus
Okay.
in order to accumulate the assets. Now, when President Giscard, no, at the time he was Minister of Finance of de Gaulle, Giscard d'Estaing.
Hmm.
Giscard d'Estaing called that an exorbitant privilege. A bit of an envy, my wife is French,
Uh,
and
is she a
I play,
Gaullist? Uh,
yeah,
is your wife a Gaullist?
no, but she's French, and
I think every French man and woman is a little bit of a Gaullist. There's a little bit of both.
okay, right. I will play with her on that. Uh, yeah, but the point is that Giscard d'Estaing, at the time, France was a bit envious of the role starting to be played by the U.S. dollar. It was not by chance that France immediately converted into gold
Mm,
any dollar that came to France and so on. Uh, but the exorbitant privilege was this condition that the country that issues the reserve has this gift of being able to uh, use, to consume, and invest a little bit more than what it produces as a counterpart to giving this money. Now, uh, on the other hand, there is an opinion that is shared by several of the members of the Trump government that instead of this being a privilege, this is an onus
mm,
because they see this as one of the factors behind the deindustrialization of the United States, of the big trade deficits that the U.S. has. The U.S. has huge trade deficit of goods, not of service. But since the guys are some of them, well, Trump was elected twice, 2016 and last year, 2024, and in both cases, one of his flagships that functioned electorally was the promise of rewinding back history
Hmm.
and devolving the industrial parks of the Midwest, of Detroit, and people believe that.
Do you think it's
Uh,
possible?
it is not. It is not because, among other things, the technology is nowadays different, and many of these manufacturing sectors are being robotized. So it will not be possible it's not believable that the old wave of jobs of the past would return. But nonetheless, people uh, bought this, and these guys believe that this uh, this function of providing safe haven assets has causes in those respects. So here and there, the head of the Bureau of Economic Advisors of Trump, Steve
Hmm.
Muran, he wrote a piece last year before the government, before Mr. Trump's government, in which he played several ways by which the U.S. might extract a price from the rest of the world for providing this service.
Service. Yeah.
He even called them a sort of a Mar-a-Lago Accord. Mar-a-Lago, the house of Mr. Trump,
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
environment
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
Trump, and so on. Uh, uh, and it was a very, let's say, a very good in terms of publicity chosen image. And the idea was to replicate some kind of agreement as it was the one that was enacted at the Plaza Hotel in New York back in 1985, 40 years ago, when the U.S. Negotiated in Germany and Japan, accepted at the time to appreciate their currencies, devalue the dollar, in order to change the humongous trade balances that Japan and Germany were having at the time with the US. And not exactly because of the agreement, but it worked. And so this guy comes now. Now things are completely different. You no longer have simply Germany and Japan as the major uh, 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 sides on this surplus with the US. Now you have China, you have the private sector, the treasuries held, the US treasuries held abroad they are increasingly, and the share today is higher of private agents, it's not other central banks. And the central banks, China has been decreasing its share,
Hmm.
but you have Japan and many others. So it would be complicated to have some sort of an agreement at some Mar-a-Lago meeting and so on managing exchange rates and so on. But then the guy, when comes with ideas like, wow, we could demand the creditors to accept swapping the existing U.S. treasuries in their hands, which are those assets that serve as reserve. They are particularly midterm, short term. They're liquid. But then the guy comes with the proposal of let's swap. Let's obligate these other central banks, for instance, to exchange to swap those securities with 50-year or 100-year long treasuries and paying a small stipend, a small interest rates. That would be a default. That would be, but it's just one example of how this guy illustrated how this service provided by the U.S.
Hmm.
As a provider of safe haven assets could be charged on the others. And that makes, well, since the beginning of the government, no reference has been made to the Mar-a-Lago court. Here in Washington, every time this guy appears to speak, people ask questions, but he runs away. But it
Like every
illustrates,
politician.
but it illustrates uh, one of, let's say, how this view, not necessarily as a benign thing, the instead of a exorbitant privilege, uh, these guys tend to see it as an onus. And
Mm.
of course, and everybody reads that, and it's one more reason behind the ongoing diversification of global portfolios, not only by central banks, but also by private agents who have
Mutual.
demonstrated that. And that's why we have seen a certain devaluation of the US dollar relative to the other currencies. So, to cut a long story short, uh, the US dollar hegemony did not fall, is not declining abruptly, but it it suffered a click, right? And indeed, when one looks at overall the evolution of the U.S. dollar, the U.S. dollar will comprise more or less 70% of global reserves uh, 20 years ago. Nowadays, it corresponds to something a little bit below now, 60%. So the point is that we are watching a slow and gradual de-dollarization.
The slow death of an empire.
Yeah,
Okay.
but not a collapse, right?
I have a question with regards to that.
Yes.
History has shown the US go in and out of splendid isolationism a couple of times. The arguments that were made, amongst many other things, was always to strengthen the US economy internally. Do you think this decrease
Yeah.
that you mentioned has to do with that? Are returning to a period of splendid isolationism so that they can then go back into a boom period?
Well, I it's a possibility, but I don't believe that it would be splendid, this isolation. There's going to be a cost. There is a cost for the US economy. One important aspect, it's good that you mentioned this because that reminds me as well. In the last few years, the economic performance of the US has outstripped any other alternative, at least in terms of advanced economies. The growth rate in terms of GDP of the US relative to the Eurozone, to Japan, obviously, to UK and other advanced economies has been a lot higher, to the point that a nickname was established about the US exceptionalism.
Mm-hmm.
And that had to do with the increase in productivity, with the diffusion, the technological diffusion and technological innovations, including AI now. And the fact of the matter is that the performance of the US economy has been really exceptionally higher than the other. You know? And that's, you know, and that's, Madame Lagarde referred to that as well on, on the need for the Eurozone to develop a stock market. To the capital markets in the Eurozone are underdeveloped. They are not as strong as a
American.
conveyor of the markets as compared to the U.S. And the U.S. with its exceptional performance, macroeconomically speaking, attracted capital from everywhere in the world. Everybody buying the Magnificent Seven, buying, not only Nasdaq but also, and this is what the trade side of the economic policy by Mr. Trump is definitely on the negative side in
Mm-hmm.
the sense that you take any reasonable, reliable estimate made, for instance, by the institutions where I worked, the World Bank and the IMF, and they all point to a high burden on the U.S. economy of the tariffs implemented by Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Well, nobody knows exactly where they will stand. The taller they are at the end of this negotiation process, uncertain and so on, the higher will be the damage. But no one has any doubt that the result,
Will
despite
be
the
better.
rhetoric, wow, yeah, yeah, yes, well, let's make America great again, and so on. The fact of the matter is that no one uh, uh, imagines the U.S. economy benefiting in terms of GDP in the medium to long term and so on. Anyway, uh, so you have the negative side, the negative trend coming from the trade policy, and uh, on the other, the many people thought that Doge, that Elon Musk agenda, would be mostly directed at deregulation. And
Mm.
many people believe that the levels of regulation have overtipped, have come too much, and that some sort of a deregulation at the appropriate level might unveil or strengthen that dynamic, technologically related dynamic that I was referring to. Well, nonetheless, instead of deregulation, Doge was focused on firing people, on cutting aid, and so on. And but the fact of the matter is that you have this duality. On the one side, the tariffs and the trade policy in general pulling down the U.S. economy, but on the other, the dynamics in terms of productivity, if the investments in technology are not affected by the uncertainty and by all the measures coming from Washington, might still provide the U.S. economy with an advantage in terms of a productivity increase relative to the rest of the world.
So,
And Madame Lagarde is correct. The Eurozone has not made the homework of unleashing its own capital market. It remains too much dependent on banks, and it has not integrated savings. And so that's going back to your question. Definitely, if not a perfect isolation, but the movement by the U.S. has been in that direction
mhm.
in all senses and consistently. Say, I don't want to pay, uh, I don't want to finance, I don't want to play for free this function of a global guardian. And so when it comes to military expenditures, when it comes to I'm going to take care of my own terrain, but not don't count on me to provide you with gifts. The hegemon, this thing of being hegemon, it's beautiful. Uh, uh, Another bad illustration of this has been the cut in foreign aid.
Mm.
USAID, sorry, USAID, dismantling is is a tough signal with consequences and so on. But in the sense, Trump and the movement seems to be this one of reclosing, not entirely isolation, but it's true. And that's why, see, uh, I'm an admirer of Olivier Blanchard, the great French economist.
Mm-hmm.
Opportunity to work and participate with him in many events and so on, and I read him and so on. And he has named the need for a coalition of the willing. That would be the other countries to getting together to revisit and to reinforce the multilateral framework, the multilateral system. About even if one big member is at this moment not,
Not willing to
uh,
participate. Yeah.
but the willing would maintain it, and eventually the US would return. Um,
It sounds very similar to the political theory balance of powers. So you have one big player and a bunch of small states that are equal in force with the big power.
that's right. That's right. One needs to revitalize the WTO. The reciprocal tariffs, for instance, were a slap on the face of the multilateral system because one basic rule regarding trade established in the after World War II international economic order, and it's one of the layers, the founding layers of the WTO, is the most favored nation clause, which says the following: Look, whenever you establish a tariff or any trade treatment to one country, you have to do, in principle, the same for all the others. There is no favored nation.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from, and it was afterwards accepted, in the case of regional agreements, but then you have to be explicit, you have to be to apply that equality inside the region and so on. But in principle, the most favored nation clause is to be obeyed. Well, and that's exactly the thing that the reciprocal tariffs uh, runs against. I'm going to establish country-specific tariffs. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what the reciprocal tariffs. They had nothing to do with equality of treatment. They had to do the formula that was used to establish the tariffs reflected the participation of the country in the trade balance of the U.S. If okay, if you have a deficit with us, a bilateral with us, Brazil, England, and so on, you will have only 10%. But if you have a trade surplus with us, we're gonna give you a tariff that it will reflect the size of that trade surplus, 60, 50, and so on. That was a shot exactly at the most favored nation clause. It's the break entirely with the
Yeah.
basic principle of the trade negotiations for the WTO. And in this regard, what Blanchard and others have suggested is that all the other countries, and China says, yes, 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 because even if China did things in terms of forced technology transfer and so on, and subsidies, uh, uh, and that was not necessarily within the scope of the multilateral system that we inherited from the after World War II. And the system to which China adhered and entered the WTO in 2000 has been, China has used it extremely well. not using tariffs, not but China. So uh, China's desire would be to keep things as they were,
Do you
right?
think the market trusts China enough to let it take its place?
No, entirely. See, that remember when we started the conversation and I mentioned the fact that foreign investors are still reluctant in purchasing Chinese assets because of this possibility of when you want to liquidate them, you don't
Huh?
have the money back. As a source of wealth destination, not yet. But the main aspiration of China was exactly to climb the income ladder. That's the title of my book of 2021, Climbing a High Ladder, Development in the Global Economy. Uh, I will send you.
Please.
And this book has especially a chapter on China and what China and other countries. China is not the only one. South Korea did it quite well. Singapore, some other countries got stuck in the middle. That's the case of the middle income trap that we could make a conversation another day. Middle income trap, like most of Latin America, Brazil including, and so on. Uh, and uh, and so China benefited, used well the opportunities opened by globalization, not only in terms of trade, but also in using and adapting in coupling with local development of technological capabilities. Globalization was good for what uh, is the figures. 1 billion people, 1 billion people left poverty. And 1 billion, that means much beyond China. Okay. In the 20 years, 25 years of globalization, 1 billion people. And that was related to the opportunities for peripheral countries of trading and in absorbing and using and coupling with local development of technologies from abroad. Of course, the performance were different by countries. My book is about the homework that has to be in place in that, in all successful cases, this happened. But it's a ladder that is tall to climb, but it is there. The title of my book is a counterpoint to a great Korean professor in London who wrote a book about kicking the ladder, alluding to advanced economies cutting short the possibilities for latecomers to go up the ladder. And I used in the book, including his own country, Korea, that on the contrary, the ladder is there or was there. The question is that
You made
you have to
sacrifices.
do yeah, you have to do your homework to climb the ladder. It's not something that, but it was there, and it was used, as I said. Does anybody need a figure than 1 billion people live in poverty,
Yeah.
right? Through globalization, and uh, and in this regard, uh, now I would recommend the global economic prospects released by my ex-colleagues at the World Bank last week, which is a superb work in estimating how what's happening in the retrenchment of the global economy of globalization will make much of the South to pay a toll. It will not be good, particularly for the southern countries. And
Mhm.
uh, and the report explores that. I would recommend the reading.
I'll have a look at it definitely because that sounds very interesting. I have a couple of questions that arise from this. One is, uh, Okay, I hear the point regarding Asia, and I know they still have a ladder to climb and whatnot. But it seems to me that there's a lot of players that don't particularly trust that market. And instead of redirecting it towards that market, they're instead redirecting towards countries in the Middle East, for example. So the UAE, Dubai,
Right.
Emirates, KSA, et cetera, et cetera. And I sort of wanted to see if you think, because in my perspective, I think they're going to become big. So they're going to climb that ladder, but they're going to stay somewhere along the lines like Korea. But I wanted to sort of hear from an economist how do you think that these guys will ever become big?
Well, see, that's an open question. They, it is for a long time, of course, already. The countries realized that they could not become dependent only on fossil fuels,
Hmm.
right? And they have accumulated wealth and use the wealth accumulated to buy assets abroad. Uh, and through the sovereign wealth funds, but also the individual or family rich funds and so on. And also, in some case, they attempted to develop new things inside. That's how anyone who goes to Dubai, anyone who goes
Season,
to
yeah.
the efforts to develop local technological parks and so on, is because they know that the fortunes with oil and gas are doomed to end. We
Well,
will leave the fossil fuels. We will hopefully decrease our dependence on fossil fuels and so on toward renewable forms of energy or nuclear or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that it's running against time, right? Uh, and they're making investments in that regard. Uh, yeah, I'm optimistic with respect to the results of that. Uh, it doesn't help the lack of peace in the region.
yeah. Okay. And do you think Europe is ever going to be able to be a solid counterparty to the US dollar?
If it does the homework, as I said, in terms of drive to unification,
Europe
but
is not known for doing its homework.
well, yeah, yeah. On the other hand, Alex, uh, yeah, it is an unknown whether the this unity of Europe has been threatened by the rise of some very far right-wing parties.
Hmm.
Will they become predominant? And we don't know. Hopefully not. But it's a question in the open. Yeah.
I mean,
The
I understand what you're saying, but if you look at it politically, for example, there was a threat in Germany, there was a threat in France, in terms of right wing nationalist far rights, whatever you want to call them, rising, and power came into their hands. And other than some specific policy things, they have not done something great like exiting the eurozone or exiting the European
yeah,
Union. So I understand what you're saying from sort of your perspective, but from my perspective, I don't really feel that even ultra far right nationalists would decimate potentially
right.
Europe.
Okay. Okay. But there is a mile to go in deepening the
Mm.
unification, which
Hmm.
is how we started the conversation about why the euro has not got there yet, and it was vulnerable as revealed in the eurozone crisis because of the half-baked lesson. See, back in 1990, 1909, yes, still lived in Brazil, and and the Konrad Adenauer Foundation from Germany was organizing events in Brazil and in other Mercosur countries, proposing for the Mercosur countries, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay,
Mm-hmm.
Paraguay,
Well,
to follow the steps of the Eurozone that was then about to inaugurate the euro. And I had on my right side a guy from the American Enterprise Institute from here, from Washington, which is a conservative think tank. And on my left side, a then professor who later became chief economist of the OECD
mm-hmm.
and Minister of Finance of Italy. So I had at the time just one think tank guy and the professor. And I was speaking, let's say, giving a Brazilian view on the agenda of the creation of a. And the guy from my right, from the American Enterprise Institute, comes and says, this project of the euro will end up leading to a civil war in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And why? Because the preconditions for an optimum currency, as established by the Nobel Prize winner Robert Mundell, are not there. You don't have similarity of shocks. You don't have fiscal unity. You don't have this and that. Okay, so it's gonna fail. It's gonna generate. And then Pietro, the Italian by my left side, comes and says, "You Americans don't understand. The euro is a political project exactly to create, to change things in order to make concrete the optimum currency conditions. So that's the political objective. Well, to some extent, to some extent, both
All
had
right.
some grain of reason.
Mm.
Uh, the American, by insisting that the preconditions were not there for an optimum currency area, while Pietro was perfectly right by observing that it was a project of building up, but it got in the middle. The building up of the preconditions for an optimum monetary area has not been complete. You don't have the same unification in terms of fiscal, in terms of banking systems, in terms of financial systems, and so on. So, uh, and the eurozone, was able to respond to the crisis exactly when it issued signals that was going in that direction. I will do what it takes to sustain the euro by the then president of the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, as well as the common issuance of a bond. So the agenda is in the middle, but let's see if the political will is
Both
enough
sides
to.
were one was a very American perspective, the other one was a very Italian perspective. Like if you told me about the Italian perspective, I would tell you this guy is exactly it.
Well,
Okay, coming back
okay.
to the original point, Otaviano, and this is my final question to you. Do you believe that we are in fact moving towards a multipolar monetary system?
Yes, but a very gradual process.
Do you think
Uh,
we will live to see it?
well, gradually, yes. As in 20 years, you have the decline of the US dollar from 70 to 60, a little bit less than 60% of the global reserves. That's in 20 years. See, it's very gradual. Uh, and by the way, the diversification has been of reserves has also included other smaller countries and smaller currencies, the Australian, the Canadian dollar. So they have made advances in reducing transaction costs using electronic payments and so on. And they have also risen. So I guess we are about to see, well, and it's true that by through the use of local currencies and the use of arrangements, uh, the Central Bank of China and other central banks, the renminbi has also increased
Hmm.
to the point of threatening, right? And but
It's a matter of trust, though. The RMB. Does anybody? There's not a lot of trust there. So.
no, exactly because see, you cannot take for granted that you buy their a treasury from China, and then okay, now I want to switch that to buy a yacht or buy a house.
Mhm.
Then I sell it. I It's not guaranteed that we'll be able to make the money.
Take the money and make something out of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, Otaviano, I don't want to take any more of your time. I really appreciate this conversation. It's always very, very insightful, both reading and talking to you.
Oh,
Uh,
great.
so thank you for
I
taking this
wish
time
you the best, and
on a Saturday morning. I'll pop in a link with as many of your stuff I can find, or if you have an author's page, feel free to send it through. I'll also include it. Uh,
okay,
and I wish you the best of luck, and hopefully, one day we can do this in person in Washington.
that's right. That's correct.
Awesome. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.